Across Scotland, people are crying out for change, and they're right to be. Too many are struggling with the cost of living. Our NHS, infrastructure and public services are under real pressure, and the climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. Storms, wildfires and water shortages are affecting our lives right now. I'm asking people to vote for the Scottish Greens because we believe Scotland can be fairer, greener and more equal, and we're prepared to be bold enough to make that happen. It is the job of the radical to make hope possible. We're offering real action to ease the pressure on people's lives, moving towards free public transport for everyone, investing in warm, affordable and energy-efficient homes to cut bills, and delivering affordable, accessible and flexible childcare. We want to see thousands more social homes, stronger rights for renters, and properly funded local services, including mental health support and access to GPs and dentists. We are serious about tackling inequality at its root. That means taking meaningful steps towards a universal basic income, a fairer tax system where the wealthiest pay more, and action to close the gender pay gap and tackle poverty. And equality isn't an add-on, it is central to who we are. At a time when division and fear are being stoked and marginalised communities are being scapegoated and demonised, we won't just stand by and watch. We will be active in showing support for LGBTQIA+ rights, anti-racism and anti-fascism, disability justice, and the rights of immigrants and refugees. Scotland should be a place where everyone feels safe, valued and able to thrive. At the same time, this is also about the future. We must act on the climate crisis and move away from fossil fuels, not just with targets, but with a genuinely just transition that creates secure, well-paid jobs for the future, with the workers and communities affected at its heart. Because we cannot have a healthy environment or society with a dirty economy. But we won't get that kind of change by sticking with politics as usual. In the Scottish elections, every vote matters, and the regional list vote is where you can choose something much more ambitious. So if you want lower bills, better public services, real climate action, and a fairer society, then vote for the Scottish Greens on the regional list. We can put people and planet before profit. A better Scotland isn't just possible. If we're bold enough, it's within our reach.
I will be voting SNP on both the regional list and for the constituency. Obviously, the main reason is because I support Scottish independence and have done for my entire life. And now really is the time that we can push towards independence, and it will be a huge disappointment if the SNP chicken out of challenging the inevitable unionist denial of our democratic right, of our right to self-determination. Because let's be honest, whoever is in power after these elections, both our national election here in Scotland, the one in Wales, and the English local elections, it might not be Keir Starmer in power. So whoever's in power, Labour, is very unlikely to grant us a independence referendum. So we're going to have to, the SNP government are going to have to get really tough. They're going to have to go into unprecedented territory, perhaps. But so that's the when I say that's the main reason, it is the central reason. There are larger reasons, obviously, at play here, relating to the British state, relating to the other parties. Obviously, one of the major things is, of course, what's occurring currently in the Middle East, in Gaza and in Lebanon, and of course in Iran. I think the SNP have taken very good lines, moderate, but moderate these days is quite radical. If you look at Labour's record, it's collusion with genocide in Israel at best. You look at it on Iran, it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. To be fair, Keir Starmer has he stopped the UK from being fully in, if you like, but you never know with Labour. That's the problem. And really, they have caved to Israel and everything. That's why you've got people in prison currently, grannies and or even great grannies for supporting Palestine in really moderate manners and holding up signs saying they support Palestine. So there's lots of interconnected reasons, but all of them to me lead back to Scottish independence. Whether they're economic questions, I could have went into that, but I don't have time. Safe to say that I support the SNP centre-left social democratic programme. I'd love to see them to be able to expand it. Sometimes I think they are too cautious, and that's why, even though I disagree with the Greens on many issues, I hope the Greens serve to hold the SNP somewhat accountable. I hope the Greens get a good vote. But as I say, I am rather sceptical of many of the Greens' policies, to put it lightly.
This is Richie Venton from the Scottish Socialist Party, appealing to people to vote for the SSP on Thursday. On your list, vote the peach-coloured voting form to elect a team of socialist fighters, working-class people who will stand up for the millions against the millionaires, for people not profit, for an independent socialist Scotland. The Scottish Socialist Party is the only party whose MSPs will remain in touch, grounded, uncorrupted in a society which is stinking with corruption and politics, by rejecting the £75,000 MSP salary and living instead on the average skilled worker's wage. We're also the only party with a package of policies to combat poverty, inequality, pollution and the misery that capitalism creates. A socialist action plan which includes free public transport for all, not just on buses, but on an expanded people's transport service of buses, trains, ferries and subways to entice people out of car usage, to cut down poverty, put at least £1,400 a year in workers' pockets on bus fares to work, and, of course, to create at least 60,000 jobs, to have green-powered forms of transport built in Scotland and free at the point of use. We've pioneered for over a quarter of a century abolition of the unfair regressive council tax, something the SNP promised 19 years ago and have still done nothing to abolish, even when the SNP and Greens were in coalition. We want to replace that with an income-based Scottish service tax, which is based on the ability to pay, where the rich pay far more, poor people pay less, 8 out of 10 would be better off, and it would double funds for local jobs and services. We also call for public ownership of energy, to abolish profiteering from heating your home, to create jobs, 70,000 of them in the energy sector, and to provide clean, green energy that's at affordable rates. Instead of selling off the Scottish seabeds to multinationals like BP and Shell, as the SNP Green Coalition did, we want public ownership of all forms of energy to provide for the people and not the profiteers. We want to build 100,000 decent quality housing, council houses at affordable rents in order to combat the housing emergency and give young people independent living, amongst other things, alongside policies like a £15 an hour minimum wage for everybody from the age of 16, scrapping age wage discrimination, and a 4-day week on 5 days pay. If you want to combat poverty, inequality, war, pollution, if you want an independent socialist Scotland for the millions and not the millionaires, vote for the Scottish Socialist Party, Scotland's one socialist party on the lists.
Hi, I'm Damien Donnelly, and I'm here to tell you why the only party to get my vote in the coming elections is the Scottish Greens. I joined as a member last year, and that was after it became clear that the far-right influence was growing in Scotland, and I felt I had to invest in a political party that was willing to unflinchingly campaign in direct opposition to right-wing values that were being pushed on us by politicians and the media. When it comes to fighting the far right, I believe it's crucial to always remember that trans people have been the first demographic group to have their lives materially worsened in this country as a result of far right influenced activism, and I believe the Scottish Greens are the only party which approaches the fight with this in mind. I was privileged to be invited to one of Swinny's summits last year with the theme of fighting the far right. I was the only person picked to speak who mentioned trans people, and I told him that what was happening to them was evidence that we were already losing the fight he was asking us to help him win. I also pointed out that dropping the conversion practices bill was another shameful concession to the far right. The SNP have now made a manifesto promise to enact a ban within their first year in Parliament if the UK government doesn't enact one. But that's the same promise Nicola Sturgeon made in 2021, which Swinney then broke on her behalf. And that was shortly after he appointed as his deputy someone who openly admitted she would have voted against my right to marry had she had the chance. To be fair to Swinney, he has been excellent at countering reformed anti-immigration rhetoric, showing what a powerful LGBT ally he could be if he wanted. The party had my support at times when led by Nicola Sturgeon, but Humza Yousaf and John Swinney have destroyed my respect for it because of their actions. There are some Scottish Labour candidates I would have valued as individuals before, but now every single one of them is standing on an explicitly transphobic manifesto written by leadership which seems intent on courting the votes in favour of right-wingers and bigots. I was at an LGBT hustings a few weeks ago, and Maggie Chapman was the only candidate to speak unequivocally of bettering LGBT rights with rhetoric referring to actual policy, which helped confirm my voting decision, and then this was reinforced by comparing the manifestos sometime later.
The SNP is going to probably win this election. I say probably, it will. But the question is whether we will get a majority or not. And obviously the strategy that John Swinney has come with, which is that a majority is the key to unlocking the logjam constitutionally to get a referendum and a Section 30. And he's right. You know, in 2011, we got a majority and, you know, the no parties said no at the time. Cameron said no. Everybody said no. But as soon as we got our majority, they started to be more reasonable. And I think that will be the same. And particularly so once it causes Keir Starmer's resignation as one of the many factors, apart from the fact that Labour will lose the elections in England, Scotland and Wales and be faced with nationalist first ministers. But also I think it's a matter of why the SNP is winning. Of course, it's partly down to Labour being so shy, but it's actually being I think positively, the SNP is making the right noises around poverty, inequality, cost of living crisis. It's actively got policies which address those things. And the 100 days thing that John's launched, that, you know, the things that are priorities to fix straight away, he's done the right messaging around those things. But obviously the £2 bus fare cap, supermarket, limit on the cost of baskets of goods, you know, so price controls, that's a thing, similar to minimum alcohol pricing, was going to be massively opposed by the industries. It will be, but the fact is we can get it through on public health grounds. So the fact that John's done that and pushed that forward is being noticed. And also the expansion of childcare and, free 40 hours, that sort of stuff. Also, free school meals expansion, that's happening to all primary school kids in August in Glasgow, and hopefully it will spread across the country. We've also got, important £2 bus fare cap. That cap will obviously be massively opposed by companies like First Bus. And I look to see the smallest violin orchestra in the world be playing an extended concert when we get their tears around their profits being lost. But I think it's really important that, the cost of living, such as for transport to work, the maintenance of all the things that the SNP government's done. The workers know that, SNP is on their side on these questions. And I think that's really important that those messages and signals are being very clearly made to the electorate. However, I wish they were a bit more bold on things like taxation. Although we, of course, still have a progressive taxation system, I would like to see more in the progress of community energy. There is some stuff there about community wealth building, which is good. We've got the bill that's just been passed in Parliament. And that's really important that, these questions have been, just to let you know that I think that this is going to be good. The independence movement will benefit from an SNP majority, but if we don't get one, then clearly what I'm looking for is a very overwhelming pro-independence majority as well in that Parliament. It'd be interesting to see if the Greens do come anywhere close to being second in this election. That would be, and also a massive defeat for reform. John's stance very firmly against what reform are standing for is good. It sets the tone in this election that there will be a government that will be standing up against the racist immigration policy of Westminster. And the contrast couldn't be more stark. Scotland, the country is going in a different direction. It's closer to what I would call socialism than England will be for any time soon. I hope that the Greens do well in England. I hope that the Plaid Cymru wins in Wales. That is the progressive alliance I think is really important that we get across the UK. But in Scotland, it needs to be votes for the SNP. So both votes SNP and a SNP majority.